Good evening. Hello, bookworms, bibliophiles, and all around kind, awesome, wonderful people who love to read and listen to books. Welcome. Welcome to the opening night of the 18th annual Savannah Book Festival. My name is Kristen Ott, and I'm the Vice President of SBF's Board of Directors and the Chair of the Author Committee. When people ask me why I love the festival so much, it can be hard to explain the energy and excitement, just the overall spirit of joy that permeates the whole weekend. It's almost magical. And it is us, all of us here together, who create the spirit of warmth and hospitality that makes this event so special. So thank you for caring about books and for being here to help us kick off what is sure to be another unforgettable festival. From the thousands of new books published over the past year, each of the 44 authors joining us this weekend was carefully chosen. Our selection process begins with nominations. So, if you have a favorite author with a new book coming out, you can nominate them for next year's festival on our website. Nominations will open for 2026 in March and close in June. After vetting, the next phase involves our Author Advisory Council. The council includes 75 people with book-related expertise like authors, teachers, librarians, publishing insiders, and longtime festival supporters. Together, they help us identify our top choices. We think they've done a fantastic job with this year's lineup and hope you agree. Tomorrow, 24 festival authors will be visiting local classrooms through our SBF at Schools program. With the generous support of the City of Savannah and the Landings land lovers, we're thrilled to be able to gift students copies of the authors' books. By giving students the opportunity to interact with nationally recognized authors and putting books in their hands, SBF is inspiring the next generation of readers and writers. Now that's some book festival magic. Of course, the magic of the festival is really only made possible by real dollars and countless hours of behind-the-scenes work. I'm about to thank the people who make the magic happen, and I would like your help. I'm sure we're a considerate bunch, so it's worth noting, in addition to applause, appropriately timed whistles and cheers are welcome. And if you're being thanked, feel free to wave or bow. Here we go. All of this has been orchestrated by our talented three-person staff. Our executive director, Tara Setter. Woo! Our assistant director, Mickey McNamara. And program coordinator, Joyce Barnard. SBF volunteers are the heart of the festival. Tonight's volunteer ushers include members of two book clubs, the Books on the Bluff and Peggy's Book Club. And if you are a member of the literati, please stand. Will you guys be able to see them? Okay, here we go. Stay standing for just a second. We hosted a reception for them before tonight's event to show them our appreciation. Thank you for that lovely applause for them. And then now, while they're sitting down, I'd like to remind everyone else that it's always a good time to join the literati. You can find more information about the benefits on our website. You can also support the festival for free by liking and following us on social media and downloading our app, which has everything you'll need to navigate the weekend. And if you enable notifications, it will actually notify you on Saturday if a venue is full. So, lastly, we are grateful to Maura Sovchin for sponsoring tonight's opening address, and for all our sponsors. You can find their names in your program, and you will hear us recognize the following donors in our chairperson circle all weekend: the Beekman family, David and Nancy Cintron, Robert Faircloth, the Courtney Knight Gaines Foundation, Betsy Lancaster, the Gerald D. and Helen M. Stevens Foundation, Robert and Linda Zerby, and the City of Savannah. Thank you. I'm sure you've already silenced your cell phone, but if you accidentally forgot, please do so now. And if you want to take a picture during the presentation, please remember to turn off the flash. And now, I get to introduce two people. So first, I'm introducing Peter Biello. He's worked in public radio since 2007 at WHQR in Wilmington, North Carolina, Vermont Public Radio, and New Hampshire Public Radio, and has won numerous AP and Murrow Awards. He earned his MFA in fiction from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and his fiction has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize. Born in Fall River, Massachusetts, he now lives in Atlanta. Welcome, Peter Biello. And now, it is an honor to introduce a writer whose work has touched the hearts and minds of countless readers, a voice that has chronicled the intimate details of the human experience with grace, insight, and profound empathy. After graduating from Barnard College, Anna Quindlen began her writing career in journalism. Her gift for blending personal reflection with larger cultural and political themes won her a devoted audience and a Pulitzer Prize for commentary for her New York Times op-ed column. Her memoir, Lots of Candles, Plenty of Cake, was a #1 New York Times bestseller, and her nonfiction book, A Short Guide to a Happy Life, has sold more than 1 million copies. As a novelist, Quindlen has captivated readers for decades. Her novel Black and Blue, about a woman who runs away from her abusive husband, was an early Oprah's Book Club pick, and her novel One True Thing, about a young woman caring for her dying mother, became a feature film starring Renee Zellweger and Meryl Streep, which garnered a Best Actress nomination for Streep. Anna Quindlen is a prolific writer who has published 13 nonfiction books, 10 novels, numerous articles and columns, and even 2 children's books. Anna's body of work is not only a testament to her literary skill, but also to her commitment to social justice and human connection. She has always been a champion for the quiet yet significant moments that shape us all, and her words have an uncanny ability to make the ordinary extraordinary. Her work resonates with readers across generations, making her one of the most cherished voices in contemporary literature. The Savannah Book Festival is proud to feature Anna as our opening headliner and to celebrate her contributions to the literary world. Please join me in welcoming the incomparable Anna Quindlen.
Well, damn, I'm impressed with myself.
You have filled the room.
Whoa.
You filled the room. Anna Quindlen, it's so nice to be able to speak with you on this opening night of the Savannah Book Festival. This is wonderful.
Thank you, and it's so great to be in this beautiful, beautiful city. I spent some time today walking around Savannah, and I just can never get over what a lovely, lovely place it is. And the weather's a lot nicer than it is in New York City right now.
You know, I was speaking to someone before the show tonight, and someone came all the way from Ohio for the Savannah Book Festival. I know, that's dedication, right? Thanks so much for everybody coming near and far to see this festival. This is great. So I wanted to start with a bit of praise that might sound a little strange, but bear with me. So when I was in the MFA program, my writing school, a professor gave me this Yogi Berra-ish advice about writing. When you start a story, start it as close to the end as possible. And your latest novel, After Annie, is just about the epitome of that advice, right? Page 1, Annie dies. And then everybody else in her life has to respond to that fact. Her husband, Bill, her 4 kids, her best friend, Anne Marie. So let's start at the beginning then. What was the germ of this idea? Where did it come from?
You know, Peter, it's so strange with this book. What usually happens is Ann Patchett and I were talking at her fabulous bookstore, Parnassus, when I was on book tour, about how there are 3 times when it doesn't look like you're writing, but you're writing. Power walking, cooking, and I can't remember the third one. But power walking and cooking were definitely big. And usually what happens is I'm walking along the Hudson River, I'm walking out in Pennsylvania where I sometimes live, and a character starts to emerge in my mind. And over time, over probably 3 or 4 months, I start to know more about her, what she does for a living, what her birth order is, who she's connected to. And at a certain point, I know so much about her that I have to sit down and start writing, because otherwise I'm going to start to lose what I know. After Annie was completely different than that. One day, I suddenly had in my mind the mental picture of a young wife and mother lying on the floor of her kitchen. And the scene in my mind is almost exactly what is the beginning of the book. That was just the moment when I knew I was kind of off and running. The interesting thing for me, technically, and you'll appreciate this as a writer, is originally I was going to tell the entire story through her daughter, Allie, who is 14 years old. And it became very clear to me very early on that you could only know so much about a woman through her 14-year-old daughter, that you needed other eyes on her. And that's how I came up with the idea of having the point of view be her husband, Bill, her best friend, Anne Marie, and her daughter, Allie.
Before we get too far in this conversation, by show of applause, who has read After Annie already? Okay, not everybody, but a lot of people. This is one of those, I mean, I don't think we're going to have spoilers today, but this is one of those books I feel like you can't really have a spoiler, because it's not the what, it's the how, right? How these people get, like, we know she dies. That's the premise
It's
of
the
the
first sentence.
Right, like, you know she dies, and stuff's got to happen afterwards. And these people have to go about their lives. These kids have to go back to school. Anne Marie has to go back to her job. But it's the house. So we'll get that out of the way. We're not really going to spoil anything. At least I don't think so.
No, I don't. I don't think so at all. And I've said that over and over again when I've talked about the book. But I think the thing that I hope readers get from the book is, as I was working, I thought, my goal is to make the most alive, vivid person in this book the person who dies in the first sentence. I wanted Annie to be the person who was the thing that you seized on, because that's the point of this novel. I think when we live among our beloved others, we take them for granted. We take so much about them for granted. And then when they die, they somehow become more real to us. The edges are sharper than they were before. And that's what I wanted to illustrate, that Allie and Anne Marie and Bill sort of lived this life with Annie among them, and she is still among them, but in almost a more technicolor way than when she was actually alive.
Is that true for you? And I ask that because, Allie is one of the central characters of this book. Her mother dies. We actually have this in common. Your mother died when you were 19. My mother died when I was 19. I didn't get that sense that she became sharper after she died. But was that the case for you and your mother?
No, I think the thing when your mother dies when you're young, and it will probably be the case for Allie, is that you don't know whether you're missing a person or a feeling. I mean, right after my mother died, all the rough edges, such as there were sanded off her, and she became St. Prudence Quindlen. Who'd never done, she's the loveliest human being, right? And over time that went away, but over the years I've thought I was really too young to go deep enough to know her as a person in the way that I wish I had. And what I feel like I lost, what I feel like I miss, is that sense of security that I think your mother provides. I mean, when my kids were small, because my sister, I have 3 brothers, and then the youngest is my sister, who was 8 when our mother died. She remembers nothing about her. And so when my kids were small, each year I'd think, not yet, not yet, not yet, that I was hedging my bets that they would remember me. And now they're grounded enough in adulthood that I know they know me as a person, and that's what they would miss, as well as that feeling of security that you get from your mother.
What was that like for you to almost feel like you're beating the clock every day as a parent? Like, yes, I made it another day. My kid's going to remember me.
Well, I don't think, there's an excellent book. If any of you know any woman who's, I hate the term lost, whose mother has died, there's an excellent book called Motherless Daughters. And one of the things that Hope Edelman isolates in it is this sense that that is what we become. We become very driven people. I moved from one good job to another good job to another good job because that wind of mortality was always at my back. And I felt that with my kids. And so I think I worked really hard to be kind of present for them, but you do your best. I mean, I was thinking the other day about the fact that, my kids were very rarely exposed to what my eldest called the amazing Anna Quindlen doll. What you're seeing here tonight is the amazing Anna Quindlen doll, right? I would come downstairs in a dress and makeup, and they would go, "Oh, here she goes again." But there was one day when we were up at Smith College, and for some reason the 3 of them were with me, and they were sitting in the front row, and I started to talk about how, as a writer, one of the things that I'd done was to knock off every day at 2:00. Because I had to pick them up at school at 3:00. And so in between 2:00 and 3:00, I put the writer person to bed and became the mom person. And as I looked out at the look of utter incredulity on all 3 of their faces, I realized that perhaps I had not been quite as good at that as I thought.
So among all the characters in this book, do you relate most to Allie, or is there another character?
Novel writing, particularly when you've been doing it for a while, it's like making sausage. You're in all of them, right? I mean, you start out, for example, with Portnoy's complaint. And Portnoy, I think, very clearly is Philip Roth. But the longer he does it and the more sure-handed he gets at it, the more there's little pieces of him in all of the characters. And so I think I'm partly Allie, I'm partly Anne Marie,
Dora?
I'm partly Annie. Bill is harder for me. I've gone over and over this question of, can women novelists write credible men, and can male novelists write credible women? I just had an exchange with a wonderful historical novelist named Louis Bayard, who has a new novel called The Wilds, which is about Oscar and Constance Wilde. And he's done a brilliant job of embodying her so empathetically. And I said to him, I often am critical of the way male novelists, somebody like Roth or even Dickens, deal with women. But you've dealt with a woman really well here. I think the only way I bring men alive on the page is if they're good men. The guys I don't like Rebecca Winter's first husband in Still Life with Breadcrumbs, become a little more caricature-y.
Huh. Who do you think does it well, women novelists who write men well?
What, women novelists?
Yeah. You just gave an example of the obverse, so I'm curious.
Well, I think Alice McDermott does everything well, so I might talk about Alice. Look, I think we tend to write more about women, and one of the reasons that we do is because that's an area of fiction writing that's gone begging for centuries. I mean, when Jane Austen published Pride and Prejudice, which has never been out of print since it was published, on the title page it says, by a lady, because it was so disreputable, not only for a woman to read novels, but my God, to write novels, that she had to hide herself away. And you go through the 19th century, and there's a pretty limited number of women novelists writing about being female. I mean, obviously Middlemarch is something that everybody seizes on. Austen. Once you get into the early 20th century, you have Edith Wharton and Willa Cather. But suddenly, when we were allowed out of the box of traditional femininity, of home and hearth, I think that all of us sort of came to the table and said, we're going to write feelingly about the lives of people like us, that historically we've rewarded war novels, The Red Badge of Courage, Hemingway, the things they carried, all excellent books. But for us, our battlefield is the kitchen and the living room. And I think that we're interested in exploring that.
And I do think that men need to get out of the battlefield, so to speak, and start writing more in that sphere. And in part because, okay, in this book, there's a scene where Bill, who is a plumber, he has to go visit the therapist, the counselor. And this is very close third narration, so we see his thoughts, and he's thinking, well, if anybody sees me, I could just say I'm fixing their pipes, or I'm not going to a Pilates class downstairs either. I'm definitely fixing pipes. And come on, Bill, you're going to. It's not a big deal. Like, I felt so bad for him, but I also felt like it rang true, that there are guys who feel uncomfortable with that kind of vulnerability, and that vulnerability needs to be, I think, more ever present.
Well, and one of the things that's clear about him is, and this is commonplace, I think, in a lot of the marriages I'm familiar with, is he doesn't need to have that because Annie carries that. Annie carries all of that, and it's not until Annie's gone that he realizes how much of that freight she carried, along with all the other stuff like, oh my God, Benji's feet hurt because his shoes are too tight on him. I mean, the truth is, women run the world. And Annie runs her world until she's not there anymore. And he has to step up. And one of the things I really like about him is that with a certain amount of push, he does step up. By the end of the book, you can tell that he's going to step up.
Yeah, he's made some changes, and it was nice to see him evolve. I mean, that's almost the point of a novel, right? You're watching these characters change under duress, and he changes in a way that I feel like, not spoiling, like it's positive growth for him. He has a choice. He has a choice. He could grow in a negative way.
That's a really good way to put it, though. They're all facing the future at a certain level under duress because this woman is no longer an active part of their lives anymore.
I would love to have, obviously this is beyond the scope of your novel, but just my curiosity about these two characters, Annie and Bill, I would love to see just them have a conversation too. I mean, I'm sure maybe as part of your writing process, you write these things and then throw them away, just so I don't know, you tell me, but I'd be so curious to hear what they have to say to each other.
Well, and one of the ways in which the thing I always say is, once I've published a novel, it doesn't matter what I intended anymore. It doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to readers. And one of the great things about meeting readers is that a lot of times they will tell you things about your work that you haven't even considered, because you're in the weeds with all this. You've created this world and you have no 30,000-foot view of it. That's what your editor exists for, to say to you, this works or this doesn't. But readers are really good at zooming in some of this stuff. But when you're out in the world, out promoting your book or talking to readers, and someone says to you, I wonder what happens to them afterwards, you feel this massive score.
All right.
Because because then it turns out that they seemed really real to the reader, and that's your whole goal, to make them really real.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm glad I'm glad that compliment meant something to you. It was a genuine reaction from me. I wanted to also ask you about Anne-Marie, because this novel's about grief, it's about loss. It's also, to some extent, about female friendship, as a lot of your writing has been. Can you talk a little bit about developing the character of Anne-Marie, who close friend since grade school with Annie and has developed an addiction to opioids, and it has, with Annie's help, kicked the habit, at least temporarily, and after her death, the stress compounds, let's say. So can you tell us a little bit about Anne-Marie?
Sure. I think that a lot of us have either a best friend or a longtime friend who's kind of the yin to our yang, where people will say to you, I don't get why you guys are friends. You're so different. And they become more and more different as their lives go on, because Annie has a very kind of conventional, traditional life, and Anne-Marie clearly wants more than that. And not only does she want more than that for herself, she wants Annie to want it too. And it's about, to some extent, those people who want things for you that you don't necessarily want for yourself. And I think one of the things that Annie's death does for Anne-Marie is to make her realize that what Annie had was pure gold. It wasn't showy, and, the kitchen was too small, and the car wasn't great, but it was love. It was the stuff of real life. And I think we're in a time where we often overlook the importance of the stuff of real life, and how, there's that old saw that I think is in A Short Guide to a Happy Life. No man ever said on his deathbed, I wish I had spent more time at the office. And I really live by that. Or the one my father sent me, the postcard that said, if you win the rat race, you're still a rat. There's something in this book that is about the beauty of the quotidian life, the sense of, every day making the school lunches and making the dinner, and it seems really humdrum. And then at a certain point, you look back on it and say, yes, that's what I had and that's what I wanted.
Anne-Marie was the only character in this book that really made me really challenge the morale, like how much I would follow her through her decisions, right? Of course, when you're doing an addictive substance, you're not in the best frame of mind. But it was still challenging. I was wondering if you thought about that as you were writing her, and wondering to what extent readers would follow along with her and sympathize with her.
It didn't occur to me that there would be an issue with that, Peter. And then I was in an event, I think in San Diego, and there was practically a food fight between these two groups of women, because this one group of women said to me, I hate Anne-Marie. And this other group of women were like, what? No, Anne-Marie is really good. And look, and I just was sitting looking at all of them going, But it didn't, again, it's about that 30,000 feet view that, like, when you're among them, you you understand them, and so at some level you forgive them. And of course, you know, as the writer, that Anne Marie is going to wind up in a much better place. That unfortunately, the death of her best friend is going to teach her some valuable lessons that are going to put her on a better path. And, you know, I think that's true sometimes, that I mean, I'm a completely different person than I would have been had my mother not died when I was young. And in lots of ways, I'm a better person than I would have been had that not happened. And I would trade in that better person for my mother having lived a long life in a New York minute.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Respect to my mother too. With first of all, I'm Team Anne Marie. I think she's making bad decisions, but you're not yourself when you're in the throes of a substance. That said, I think I understood Bill's feelings towards her, not in the way that she understood them, though. I mean, when we're in close third narration, listening to Anne Marie thinking about how Bill thinks about her, she thinks he's jealous, right? Like he wishes he had the connection that they had. And they did have a unique connection, not saying they don't. But if I were in Bill's shoes, I'd be worried about my kids being around someone who is not in full control of their faculties. Did that?
But even before then, you're starting from a different place. I mean, there's a line in the book that says, "No man really likes his wife's best friend."
Yeah, that was from her perspective. If I'm recalling.
Yeah, but I think there's some truth to that. So that even he knows. I mean, when he first meets and gets together with Annie, he knows that Anne Marie is hostile to their relationship and thinks Annie deserves better. And so it just snowballs and gets worse and worse and worse. But of course, eventually he feels like Annie is going not the extra mile, but the extra hundreds of miles for Anne Marie, and really wants her to cut her off. And it's just
Well, she puts her job at risk.
it's
That's
just
scary.
not going to happen. I mean, among Annie's other virtues, she's a very loyal person, which is, why she is such a good wife to him.
I will say, reading this book and then also listening to a few conversations you've had on podcasts led me to turn to my wife the other night and say, "Am I your best friend? Or is someone?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "No, you don't have to say that. Like, if and it's fine. We had a good conversation. But it did make me wonder because that, there is a difference, broadly speaking, with exceptions, relationships between women and the relationships between men. And I've heard them, because I've struggled to make friends among men. And the therapists I've been to, I'm not ashamed to admit that, have said that, men tend to have these, what they call shoulder relationships. Like we're shoulder to shoulder, like we're fishing, we're watching the game, we're drinking the beer, we're talking about that beer or the game or the fish.
How about those birds?
And then there's a funny part of your novel that resonated with me along those lines. So Tom, Anne Marie's husband, apparently goes away on a vacation with his guy friends for a little while, and he gets back, and Anne Marie asks him, I remember this correctly, Anne Marie asks, "Oh, how's your friend whose wife is going through chemo doing?" And he's like, "She's going through chemo?" Like, didn't talk about it at all. And I'm like, yeah, that would happen. That 100% would happen.
Okay, and just the fact, dude, that you had to say, "I'm starting to make friends with men."
Yeah.
Like we never say that.
Yeah.
We never. We've been friends with women since we were 4.
Envious. Very envious.
And they're our ride or die.
Yeah. No, that's a wonderful thing. That's certainly a wonderful thing. So seeing Annie and Anne Marie and the dedication that she has, in spite of the risks that she would pose, I mean, you just got to know this person inside and out, and clearly they know each other inside and out, sort of linked almost in DNA. You had mentioned at one point in one of the podcasts I heard that caregivers like Annie seem to be the most sympathetic characters in your novels. I wanted to ask you a little bit about that.
That
Caregivers, like Annie works at an old folks home. Why is that?
I don't know, but it happens over and over again. I mean, kind of the heroine of this book, other than Annie, is Miss Cruz, who's the school counselor. And in other novels, it's been the social worker or the nurse or, I mean, let me backtrack for a minute. To me, the single most important group of people in this country, as I say over and over again, are teachers. I mean, I am a writer, as I say over and over again, because of teachers. I am a writer because over and over again I would hand in a paper and someone would say to me, this is really good, you should keep doing this. And so that kind of encouragement, I mean, the power of that, the power of these people who stay in place. Actually, the protagonist of my new novel, which will come out in 2026, is an English teacher at a girls' school. And there's that idea that Polly stays in place and the girls cycle through and move on. But she sometimes can make such a huge difference in their lives. But that's also true of nurses and social workers and all the caring professions. And I guess I kind of want to pay homage to those people because except for being a mother, I haven't done that. I mean, I've chosen a different way of life, and I think what they do is so utterly admirable and important.
I wanted to ask you about the generation difference, because I think these characters who were in their late 30s would probably be about your kids' age, right? I don't know
Yeah.
how old your kids are. Yeah.
Yeah, about my kids' age.
So millennials, and you know, they're so you're writing about a different generation. You're also writing about a place that is not described in terribly specific detail, and by that I mean you're not naming town names or street names or things like that. And presumably this happens in present day because there are phones. It seems like they're smartphones, but people aren't glued to them. So I'm wondering if, you know, there was how you were thinking about writing about a generation not your own, and second, whether you're thinking about writing in a more timeless manner, placeless manner. This is kind of everywhere USA, could happen anytime.
Yeah, I intentionally did not ground this at a moment in time. There's nothing in the book that will say to you, this happened in 2010, or this happened in 1998, or such like. And it's the same with the geographic. It's kind of small town any place. And that was really intentional. And I don't think that at some basic level, there is that much of a generational difference in terms of the day-to-day living of a life. I think what Anne-Marie does for a living, this sort of interlocutor between this one community and the crafts community, is much more of the present day than any other job that you could have, but it's not specifically, 2023. I like readers not to feel pinned down by certain kinds of specificity in some of my novels, although in others it's very clear. I mean, in Rise and Shine, you're clearly in New York City and in a certain kind of New York City, and in Miller's Valley, you're in this place that I've invented, but that is very kind of tangible at that moment. But I like sometimes for the reader to be able to ground themselves in however they see this. It's funny, my first novel was called Object Lessons, and it's about an established sort of pre-war suburb that has new houses being built all around it. And I went to do an event in Pelham, New York, and when I got there, the person who was organizing the event said, well, as you can imagine, we're all pretty excited to have you here. And I was like, thanks. And she said, well, I mean, because because of Pelham. And I was like, huh? And she said, well, we all know that this is Pelham in the book. And I said to her, I've never been to Pelham before. And she didn't believe me. So as I said, the book belongs to the reader at a certain point.
Yeah. Not just yet, but in a little bit, we'll open up questions for you. I believe there'll be someone going around with a microphone so that you can ask your question now. So keep that question in mind. Not just yet, but we'll be there. Keep those lights down. I did want to ask just a few more questions about your writing process because you were a journalist for a long time. And I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about how either your habits as a journalist, the techniques you learned as a journalist helped you in fiction.
It was such a huge help having been a reporter. And by the way, there's no better job on earth than being a general assignment reporter.
Anywhere or in New York in particular?
Pardon me?
Anywhere or in New York in particular?
I think, when I was still right out of high school and then in college, I did it in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And I just love, look, I was a well-brought-up Catholic girl, okay? Folded hands on the desk. You never ask rude questions, and you never ask people about money or their personal lives. And then I get a job where all I'm supposed to do is ask people about money and their personal
That's the best.
life.
It's the best.
It was like, being let out of the cage. Where was I going with that?
Yeah, because you don't have to ask anybody about Anne Marie's money, for example. You just make it up.
But in some ways that makes it. In some ways, it makes it harder because when you've got the stuff in the notebook, you could put that on the page. But when you're writing a novel, the notebook is totally in your head. But what I took away from being a reporter was I can write really tight. A lot of what I read now, it's 40, 50, 60 pages too long. It's what my editor calls in love with the sound of your own voice. This is you, Anna, in love with the sound of your own voice. So I can write really tight. I can write even when I don't feel like writing, which is really, really important given what I do. After all those years of writing people's words down in my notebook, I have a pretty good ear for dialogue. When I finish a first draft, I spend a week reading the entire book aloud, which I sort of have to warn the household. I'm doing the read aloud now because otherwise they'll think she's really lost it up there. And it's usually in the dialogue. Sometimes I find clunks in the prose, or I'm reading a sentence aloud and at the end I can't breathe, and I'm like, ooh, that's what Mother Mary Ephraim called a run-on sentence. But usually I find it in the dialogue. I'll read a line of dialogue and I'll think, okay, real people don't talk like that. Fix it right now. So there's that. And I think being a reporter, at least a street reporter, taught me so much about human nature that eventually I brought to the table. So I feel like I have been infinitely better at what I do with fiction by having been a reporter all those years.
So your routine is still 3 hours or so, 4 hours in the middle of the day?
Yeah, more or less. I try to be sitting down by about 9:30, and then usually I work till 12:30 or 1. I start to lose the edge to the imagined world at a certain point, and then I have to knock off because nothing's good is going to happen after that. When I'm working on nonfiction, I can work much longer, just because I'm working with actual real stuff, and my imagination doesn't have to come into play in the same way.
Well, I'll end this portion of the conversation with another Yogi Berra-esque piece of writing advice / compliment, which is the advice I got was a novel is really all the right information in the right order. And so I will say that after Annie has all the right information in the right order.
Oh,
It's a wonderful
thank
book.
you.
Anna
Thank
Quindlen,
you.
thank you so much for
Thank you,
speaking with
Peter.
us. All right, lights are going up. Let's hear from the audience. Maybe that person who wooed for New Brunswick, New Jersey has a question. Surely you have a
Is there a
question.
microphone? Is there a hand up?
We've got some hands up. Hand. And the ushers are coming with microphones. Stand by. Raise those hands high. We've got some mics coming down the aisle so they can see you.
There we go.
All right.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for coming to Savannah. It's wonderful to have you here. And I do want to make a comment before I ask the question. Flannery O'Connor is one of our favorite authors because she was, her childhood home was here in Savannah. So I hope before you leave, you do drop by and see it because it's a wonderful place. But my question for you, too, is all of the main female characters, all their names start with A. So is that just, they said, I want to be called this, or did you do it for any particular reason?
Yeah, my editor, who has edited all 21 of my books for her sins, said to me at a certain point, you know, there's a lot of A's in this book. And I said, and your point is? In exactly that tone of voice. I never pick a name for a character. They just come with their names. And Annie just came with her name, and Anne Marie just came with her name, and that's all there is to it. And I have never changed a character's name until this new book, which comes out next year, because I realized that there was a character in it where things were going to end badly for her, and who might be construed to be in the same wheelhouse as one of my good friends. And it wasn't, it would have been hard for her if I had kept, and again, the character came with the name, and I'm like 2/3 of the way through the book, and I go, oh my God. And so I just tweaked it just a little bit, and it's the first time I've ever done that. And after a while, I got used to the slightly different name, but I just couldn't. Look, I mean, novels come and go, but your friends are forever. And so I had to do that.
Question down here?
The mic is making its way across
Or
that
is it over here?
row.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I was a big fan of your column in the New York Times, and we're about the same age, I would say. And I just wondered what caused you to leave that and go to writing novels, writing fiction. And also, one of your columns that I loved, I remember it was, during the Iran-Contra scandal, and you said that you turned to your husband and you said, I'll meet Abu Nidal anytime, anywhere. Anyway, I wondered though how that happened, how that transformation happened from nonfiction to fiction.
First of all, I was really lucky. I got to do 3 different columns at the New York Times. I got to write a column called About New York, which is a reporting column, but with kind of an idiosyncratic writing style, which is the job I always really dreamed of but never thought I'd get. A woman had never done it before. And then I created this column called Life in the 30s that ran once a week for 3 years that was sort of more personal. And then I wound up on the op-ed page. I think most columnists outstay their welcome. I was on the op-ed page for 5 years, and my greatest fear was to be sitting in a Starbucks and hear someone behind me say to a friend, remember when Anna Quindlen was really good? I like to leave jobs when I'm still on top of my game, and I always wanted to be a full-time novelist. Now, let me recreate my life at that point, which seems totally incredible to me. I had 3 little kids. I worked from home. I produced 2 op-ed page columns a week. And on my off day, I was trying to write fiction. And when I look back at that, I'm like, who was that person? And at a certain point, I thought, something's got to give. Well, the kids were staying. And I really wanted to be a novelist. And so the column was the thing that had to fall by the wayside. The really hard thing about that was that at the time, I was the only woman on the Times op-ed page. And I really felt like I was letting down the side. And believe me, when it was announced, there were so many people who wanted to tell me I was. But I just really felt like, at a certain level, I want to do what I want to do. I feel like that's what second wave feminism was supposed to be all about, us getting to do what we wanted to do. You come and see me later over there. And so I did, and people thought I was insane. I mean, nobody thought it was going to work out. And then it kind of worked out. And, having said that, I mean, you know, I spent a lot of time writing what I think of as MASH notes to op-ed page columnists. I mean, Michelle Goldberg is probably tired of seeing my name pop up in her email queue. I feel like David Brooks has gotten such a great second wind in the last 6 months, speaking from a place that I could never speak from. I think those voices are more important now than at any time in my entire lifetime. And so I don't miss doing it, but boy, do I understand the importance of it. So thank you for the question.
Thank you for being here. I'm also a journalist and aspiring novelist, so it's really wonderful to hear from you. I'd love if you could talk a little bit more about how you did find that first courage and that first story that you knew really was going to be the first novel.
I mean, look, I had an advantage that most first-time novelists don't have. I was writing the Life in the 30s column. It was pretty popular, and so people wanted to publish a collection of the columns. The novel was kind of the caboose on the train. My agent went out there with a 2-book deal. Okay, you get the columns and you get the novel. And the truth is, I didn't really know very much about writing a novel, except everything I'd learned from being a voracious reader. So the deal I got was basically Random House wanting that collection of columns. And then the novel worked out for them. It made the bestseller list, in part because of the columns. But I really didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I remember, you know, first of all, because I'm a reporter, I walk into Random House one day with a manuscript, and Kate's like, oh my God, I didn't know you were coming. I didn't know you. And I was like, this is the date on my contract. It says May 15th. And the whole office is struck with hilarity. Ah, the first writer in history who is delivered on the date of her contract. So Kate reads it, and then she calls me in. It was a paper manuscript. She still edits on paper, which makes me crazy. She calls me in, and she goes, okay, the writing is beautiful, and the characters are so vivid, but nothing really happens in the book. And I said, that's just like real life. And she looked down at the manuscript and said, but that's why we call this a novel. So what I learned over time was that if I put certain kinds of people in certain situations, doing certain things together, what they would generate is called plot, which I'm still much less interested in than character, but very character-driven novelist. But I had a lot to learn, but I got to piggyback on something else, which I'm always keenly aware of. And speaking of piggybacking on something else, there's something else I want to add, because I think it's really important at this moment in time. I was hired at the New York Times when I was 24 years old. I was a 24-year-old tabloid reporter, which, believe me, is nobody's idea of what they call a Times man. The only reason I got that job is because I was a woman, and they were settling a class action suit brought by 6 very brave women at the paper. It was my generation's version of DEI. And out of that, the New York Times got value for money and a Pulitzer Prize in commentary, so nobody lost anything. And some readers of the Times would say that they gained something. And it's really important for those of us who were affirmative action hires to say that over and over again. We got through the door for one reason, but once we were through the door, we delivered.
So thank you. I loved how you dealt with all the characters, all of the children, and how they dealt with this real sadness in their life. The one thing that surprised me, and I'm curious as how this popped into the whole story, is the predator, is the friend's father, and how that came into the story.
Sure. Jenny is Allie's closest friend, such as she is because she's just arrived on the scene. And I wanted to compare and contrast that kind of friendship at the same time that to some extent it mirrors Annie and Anne Marie's friendship, because you have one person who's very grounded and together and another person who is in some sort of quiet crisis. And I wanted to reflect that and also reflect the fact that in all of our lives, there are these substrata that we don't really know are happening and that we ask ourselves about. Was that real? Did that happen? And that's why, I mean, I didn't intentionally introduce this character. I knew that Allie had this friend. I knew that this friend seemed to have something going on beneath the surface, and it became clear to me that what was going on was that she was being sexually abused.
Since Annie dies on the first page, we learned so much about her from her relationships with Anna Marie, with Allie, with Bill, even with her god-awful mother-in-law. Could we have known Annie without all of them?
Could we have known Annie without her dying or without the others?
Without what part, I guess, was her relationship with those other people so essential to knowing Annie?
Oh, because I think after we die, we live in the minds of the people who love us, but we live in them in very different ways. So, you know, I focus over and over again on that old story about the blind man and the elephant. The one who's feeling the trunk thinks it's one kind of animal, and the one who's feeling the foot thinks it's a completely different kind. And I see a lot of that in this book, in that the Annie that Allie knows is in many ways not necessarily different, but has much less overlap with the one that Anne Marie knows. and ditto the one that Bill knows. So I think if you're trying to get, I mean, we've all been to memorial services where there's 5 or 6 different speakers, and if we're lucky, they each bring a different piece of that person, so that at the end you have a fuller, more rounded sense of them. And I think that's what happens here. And I also think it's what happens in life. I mean, after I die, the person that my closest friends are going to evoke, and the person that my kids are going to evoke, and that my siblings are going to evoke. There's going to be overlap in all of those Venn diagrams, but there's going to be places that belong only to them.
And that is all we have time for tonight.
You're getting a gift, I believe.
I'm sure you'll agree with me that listening to this conversation has given us all so much to go home and talk about with our ride or dies and our spouses and et cetera. Like, thank you so much for your honesty and your insight and your pearls of wisdom.
Can I
Peter?
make one more comment?
Sure.
So most of the time, I'm in a little room with a MacBook Pro all by myself. I mean, look, it's not pounding rocks, and I don't want you to play the world's tiniest violin for me, but being a writer can be really isolating and really lonely, and it's filled with doubt. And you look each day and think, is anybody going to read this? Is anybody going to care? Is this any good? And so on those rare occasions when I go out into the world and I look out into a room like this, I can live on this for the next 6 months. So thank you very much.
So, one, thank you to Peter. Peter, I think you made new fans in the audience tonight.
This was fun.
And thank you to Anna. I am going to present you with this book from Savannah's own Flannery O'Connor. It's a book called The Cartoons, so that you can remember your time here in Savannah with us. Anna will be signing books down front here in just a little bit. It is important for you, if you have bought a book, that you have a numbered signing card and that you line up in according, like with that number. And then we hope that you will all be back here with us again tomorrow night for Sebastian Younger's keynote address. And until then, yes, until then, good night and happy reading.